Hello, everyone. This is Brian Boxer-Walkler, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. And we're really excited about sharing with you a lot of the latest information that is available for patients with keratoconus that's really life-changing. And many of you have probably heard from your doctors that the only option was wearing hard contacts and transplant when you were first told about having keratoconus. And I really hear this still to this day very frequently, and I almost liken it to doctors who are giving patients this information. It's essentially like they're still stuck back in the dark ages of keratoconus treatments. And there's so many more options that are now available in modern times, but really this is kind of very medieval thinking. And I know many of you out there have been told this, and that's why we want to try to bring everyone up to date. And we are really trying to educate doctors. That's why we speak at meetings. My staff, my team and I, we write articles, we publish articles, and recently we even published a full book about keratoconus. So we have some very generous patients with their time who've been here. They're on the call right now, and I want to start by having them explain a little bit about their stories, and then we'll go into more details about the procedures. And first is Steve Holcomb. Steve is a Olympic athlete, and he has been through LASIK originally, and then had experienced keratoconus from that. And we saw Steve in December of 2007 initially to stabilize his keratoconus with C3R. And then at that time we had talked about coming back potentially in about 3 or 4 months to improve his vision with the Visian ICL, which is the contact lens implants. And so his vision before the C3R, best corrected was 20/50 in his right eye and 20/25 in his left. And then after having the Visian ICL, he's now seeing uncorrected in his right eye 20/50. That's without any correction, any lenses. And his left eye is now seeing 20/20. And I know Steve has a very busy schedule. I'm not sure Steve is with us right now. Steve, are you out there? So he's probably busy training, so we're not surprised back in Utah. We have with us Jacob, who's here from Los Angeles, and just to give you a little overview about Jacob's story is he was originally diagnosed with keratoconus in 2005, and he was progressively losing his vision. And he had the C3R done in 2007 and had a significant improvement in the best vision that he was able to achieve, going in the left eye from 20/40 to 20/15 with the contact lens, and the right eye going from 20/25 to 20/20. So Jacob, thank you very much for joining and sharing with everyone out there. We had over 300 people register for this webinar, and no pressure, of course, but thanks for sharing, and I'll let you just kind of talk about your experience and your story.
Thank you. Well, I guess I will say that in terms of my experience with C3R, my feeling going in was that there was really no downside, that that it would only strengthen my corneas and improve my overall vision, and that the procedure itself was fairly painless, and there weren't really any side effects. And so I had a lot of faith and trust in you, Dr. Boxer-Walkler, and felt like, well, why don't I try this? Because it at the best case scenario will improve my vision, significantly, and the worst case scenario, it'll just stabilize my cornea, and prevent further deterioration of keratoconus. And I have to say that the procedure itself was really no bother at all. I mean, I just sat there for a little bit and had the drops put in and had the light shown on me, and then afterwards I felt a little bit of dryness, but it was really, I mean, you sort of promised me it wouldn't be that big, wouldn't be very invasive and wouldn't be very, wouldn't make me uncomfortable, and it was totally normal and fine. And I still wear my RGP hard contact lenses, to get my best corrected vision, but I definitely feel like the C3R was a really great way to stabilize and improve my corneas, and there was no conceivable downside. So I'm very, very pleased to have done it and feel like it's an important step in, my fight to improve my vision.
And Jacob, just to share with everyone the reason why you are noticing this improvement is I just want to direct everyone's attention to the topography maps on the left side of your screen, and down below here that I'm circling in yellow is the pre-op or pre-C3R maps, and up here is the post. And the difference map is really subtracting these two to say what actually happened. And the blue right here in the middle corresponds to some flattening that was achieved in the cornea just by the C3R. And in the right eye, we have a very similar pattern from the before and the after. And again, we see down here, there's that blue flattening. So C3R can achieve a little bit of flattening on its own, and that's why, Jacob, you notice that improvement in the vision. Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that. Anything else you'd like to share with everyone, Jacob?
No, I guess I would just like to say to people who are considering it, I think I had some fear that, in some way I would be uncomfortable or there would be some possible, complication, and it was just so easy to do and so sort of simple to get good results that if I would encourage anybody who has keratoconus who's thinking about getting this procedure, the only downside I could possibly think of was paying for it, but otherwise it was a great experience, and I'm very pleased I had it.
And Jacob, I just want to clarify that the type of C3R that you had, which is the kind that we do, is called Epi-On, which is we don't remove the surface skin layer or the epithelium, which does make it a pretty pain-free, very easy one-day recovery type procedure. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to cover more of what that means versus the alternative type of C3R that's called Epi-Off, or where you remove the epithelium, and is a very different experience for patients in the recovery. But I'll go into that a little bit later. So Jacob, thank you again for joining us and for sharing. I know everyone really appreciates that.
Thank you, and I'll stay on and listen to the other stories.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so our next patient is John Melgrim, and he's from Washington, the state of Washington. And John was diagnosed back in 2006 with keratoconus, and he was really having problems with his contact lenses. In February of this year, he had Intacs in the right eye, and left eye he had a combination of procedures of Intacs and C3R, and then also CK in the left eye. And by the way, for everyone out there, CK does not stand for Calvin Klein. It's for conductive keratoplasty, and we'll talk about that too. So this was a combination of procedures that are performed all essentially at the same sitting in the same morning. And then in May of 2008, John wanted to really give himself a very full improvement in the vision, and then had the Visian ICL procedure, which really was targeted to maximize his vision without any types of contacts or glasses. And his uncorrected vision now is 20/20 in the right eye and 20/30 in the left eye. And John has, again, been really gracious with his time to want to share his experience and what this means to him. John, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I'd like to start off if anybody has keratoconus out there that you got to get C3R, because that basically stops keratoconus, and it's simple, not a simple procedure, and it usually goes along with Intacs too. But I'd say I'd do it all over again, definitely. I mean, I'm sitting here watching this screen with no corrective vision. I mean, with no glasses or nothing. I don't know what, to tell you the truth, I don't know really what all to say here, but definitely C3R has to be done. You can have keratoconus because that basically stops it. Every procedure I've had, it was basically no problem at all. You felt like you had a little bit of sand in your eye, the next day, but the next day it was pretty well cleared up, and drops dry your eyes out a little bit and keep away regular drops in your eyes, and that's about all there is to it. I love my vision. Yesterday I had sutures. I had them taken out, which was no big deal, and my eyes are kind of adjusting to that. That's about it.
Now, John, I'm sure some people that are on the line are they're thinking that, gosh, it looks like you had a lot done. But in reality, what was the experience like going through kind of phase 1 in February to really maximize the improvement in the keratoconus, and then phase 2 in May, which was really to maximize your eyesight without needing to wear any lenses?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, I really noticed it in my thickness of my glasses. On the first procedure, when I had the Intax and the C3R done in the CK, I always went with the smallest lens I could get, and they were still looked like Coke bottles, with the thinnest and the smallest I get, and they were still like Coke bottles. And after the C3R and the CK and the Intax, they were quite a bit thinner, and I was pretty pleased with that, And then, and then now with the ICL, no glasses at all. It's great.
Okay. And
just ask me some questions.
Well, I mean, was it overall an easy process for you to go through on a scale of like 1 to 10? 10 being like absolutely terrible, like getting your teeth pulled without anesthesia, and 1 being a walk in the park. I mean, how would you kind of rate things?
It's an absolute walk in the park. The first night, right after the procedure, you don't feel like doing anything. They tell you go home and rest, and if for some reason you want to keep your eyes closed. To me, that's the way it was. It felt like there was a little piece of sand in your eye. It really didn't. Doesn't hurt. Just kind of irritation in both eyes. And the next morning, the one eye, my good eye, you couldn't feel nothing. And my left eye, my bad eye, you could just still feel a little bit for maybe another day. But the one thing that was very important is keeping your eyes wet, keeping those drops in your eyes, the moisture drops. Because my first procedure, I didn't do that, and about the second day, boy, they start really hurting, and I went back to re-wetting drops, and then they came around and started feeling good. But no problem at all. And then with ICLs, it was the same thing. It was felt like something in your eye, and by the next morning, it was gone. It felt normal. I mean, you could every once in a while your eye would get irritated because you could feel the stitches just a little bit every couple days or so, or every week you kind of feel that. But now, once I got them out yesterday, I could feel this little sore last night, and today it's gone. The worst part about the CK, not the CK, the C3R is it's kind of tough staring into a bright light for a long length of time, but that's about the worst part about that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for sharing, John, and certainly, hopefully you'll be able to stay on for the rest of the webinar. And just to help with the sound quality, after we're done, if you don't mind, just kind of hanging up the phone so we, get the clearest lines here for everyone.
Okay. What are you guys on the internet?
We're on the GoToWebinar.
GoToWebinar?
Yeah. So I'll have Marie call you on that.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks so much, John, for sharing.
Yep.
Okay, and Jamila Hunter is also with us and being very kind with her time here. She's here from California, and she was diagnosed in 1999 with keratoconus and was having a lot of problems in the right eye, very intolerant to contacts, and she had, back in November, she had C3R done in the left eye, and then the right eye had Intax and C3R. And now she's able to do well with contacts, and just kind of showing you some of the good contact lens patterns. So, Jamila, why don't I kind of have you describe a little bit more in detail about your experience?
Sure. First of all, let's see. This is how to explain it. I definitely went through a lot of doctors, and I have one of my best friends has keratoconus, and actually lives in Atlanta, and he had flown out to Los Angeles to have the C3R treatment. And he kept saying to me, you really need to go and see this doctor, because he was just hearing my horror stories with, and again, the bigger problem for me was with my right eye. I was having a really hard time finding a lens to fit. So there was almost a good year where I was just basically going with one RGP lens in my left eye, and I just didn't even wear one in the right eye. And I was getting a lot of rubbing, so I was getting scratches, and it was honestly really, not depressing, but it seemed like such a, your vision, I think, until you start having problems with it, or at least I took it for granted. So I had a particular doctor I'd been going to, and who really, again, was a good doctor, but just didn't know enough about the different options. And I don't know if I should say this, but I will. I started going to the Jill Stein Center, and again, there was just so many patients, and literally their thing was like, you're going to have to get a transplant. And I know people at the School of Optometry, so I kept getting different opinions, and other places I would go were saying, you don't need a transplant, like it's nowhere near that bad. And why it took me so long to go to Dr. Boxer-Walker, I don't know. It's ridiculous. But finally, after, like a third doctor said you don't need a transplant, I did go and, have a consultation. And again, for the right eye, it literally was like 10 minutes with the intact. A friend was just asking about it the other day, and it's amazing how easy and painless, and not like I couldn't tell you anything negative about the procedure at all. Similar with the C3R, which I did in both eyes. Again, for whatever reason, with my left one, I think I just had a little irritation from the C3R, what have you, just kind of some burning, but no problem at all. And even in terms of getting a fit once my right eye kind of healed after the procedure, Dr. Weiss was just phenomenal. Like any time that I needed to come in or a lens wasn't fitting or anything I needed between Dr. Walker and Dr. Weiss, you could always get somebody on the phone. You could always come into the office. And I literally, again, had gone through things with, like, the Jill Stein Center where, I'd be sitting there for 6 hours before I could see a doctor, and there I could call in and they could get me in that day. So even beyond it being, like, not painful at all and improving my vision, just the process of it, for me, was so much better where I'd just gone through doctors who were, I don't know, just not available and honestly just didn't have that much good news. And the range of options that Dr. Weiss and Dr. Boxer-Walker had for me, from if this doesn't work, these are all the other things we can try for you before a transplant, was like night and day from the other doctors I'd seen.
And just to clarify, Dr. Weiss, that's Dr. Donna Weiss. She's an optometrist who works here with us in our institute. And, it was really, I got to tell you, Jamila, a great for us to have her come on board because she is an expert in fitting for keratoconus patients. That's kind of all she does. She's a real guru. And she moved out from New York, and we were just, tickled to have her out here.
Honestly, I think when we did find the fit we have, even she was like, wow, that was easier than I thought. We're kind of like, it might take a while, and it was pretty, I don't want to say pretty quickly, but it wasn't that long before we were able to find, the right mix of a soft lens and an RGP that worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you think is really kind of important that you haven't already touched upon to share for people who are still researching things?
The only thing I'd say, and again, as I said, I was really, really hesitant to have any sort of a procedure or to do anything, and I think somebody earlier in the call said that he felt like, what do I have to lose? I was definitely very nervous about doing anything. I was kind of like, I can live with one contact lens. Like, I don't know, it was not very logical, but I really was somebody who was just very nervous about tampering with my eyes at all. And, really, even my friend who had done it kept saying to me, I'm telling you this is beneficial. It's going to help it not get worse. So I'd say to anyone who's just kind of sitting and going, I can bear with this, I can deal with it, just that my life is so much easier. Like, the fact that I was going around like that for so long now is kind of crazy to me. And I know it can be kind of scary that somebody's, cutting into your eyes or doing things, but the amount of improvement and also the kind of peace of mind that it's not going to get worse or degenerate further is so much worth, the risk, I take it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of I know you have a very, very busy schedule, and I know everyone really appreciates your insights as well.
Sure.
So again, feel free to stay on for the rest of the call, but it's okay just to kind of hang up so we get a really clean line here.
Okay.
And thank you again. Thank you again. We'll see you soon. Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a background for everyone about what keratoconus is. And by the way, there's Paul. Are you out there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, Paul, we actually have a special guest as well who at the last minute wanted to really be a part of this. And Paul is another patient. And Paul, why don't I just, before I kind of get into this, maybe if you can just give a little bit of background about yourself and where you were at with things and what transpired and where you're at now.
Well, I started in the Army, I guess, after getting my physical there. They said your eyes are kind of bad. But, they just said, they didn't really say keratoconus, they didn't check me out that good. And so, progressively, my eyes are getting bad. And eventually I got out of the Army and went to school, and I couldn't really see the board from where I was. Had trouble, seeing stuff. And I play hockey, too, so I was having trouble seeing the puck. And eventually people were, telling their buddies and friends after seeing me drive are like, okay, you got to go get, I think you should go get LASIK. Because, the trend was coming around then, go get some LASIK. So I went to get LASIK, and they told me, that's when I found out, hey, you got the keratoconus. And they told me you're probably going to have to get a transplant. And I really don't like wearing contacts. I should probably, but I just don't like wearing them, or glasses. And so transplant was kind of out of the question, too. So, I did some research on my own. Went online and typed in keratoconus, found out what it was, and then eventually stumbled into Boxer Wackler, and found out he was right here in L.A. So made an appointment, checked it out, and got a good vibe from the doctor. Knows what he's doing, really good doc. Decided after probably, I think it was a week, I'm like, okay, I'm already losing my vision, and I realized how, keratoconus keeps on degenerating, basically. What is it, degeneration of the eye. So I decided to get the procedure done of Intax and C3R. I was kind of nervous, getting anything done to your eyes, but anyway, I went ahead and got it. The Intax wasn't that, it looks scary. It's, the thought process of it sounds scarier than it is. You see a little pinch, puts them in, take the whole procedure, maybe takes 10, 20 minutes. After that, the C3R immediately. That was that was okay. Just kind of relax, listen to music, just look in the eye. That didn't hurt at all for me. That was the thing. The Intax was that's the most pain, and the most pain you feel there is a little pinch. Next day, basically, you like the other patient said, you want to keep your eyes closed, so you just lie and you keep your eyes shut. But then next morning, you want to test out your new software. So you take a look, and swear to God, everything looks a lot sharper. Colors look really bright. You're really pleased. It feels like some sand in your eye, but eventually the feeling goes away. I've been, hello?
Yep, we're here.
So eventually you keep on, now it's been almost a year. I have my checkup coming up over here in July, my last checkup. But right now I could really see, I sit in the back of the class, see the board fine. Hockey's improved. I guess that's good. And everything's fine. Other than that, life as normal. Nothing, very happy to go do that. And, the great part about it is when, of all the things of an Intax is you can always get them removed. It's nothing, nothing that bad. But the vision is great, and, I'm young. I still want to keep my vision. And I don't really wear any lenses or any contacts or glass or anything, and I see fine. I drive better. I can see good. That's my story.
And Paul, after having these procedures, do you ever now have to worry about your vision getting worse or deteriorating, or do you kind of have that peace of mind now?
Well, you always, since I know I have this, I always I'm an eye rubber, chronic eye rubber, so I'm I guess that reminds me in a sense, not to, the rubbing. But other than that, I just, I see normal. I really don't worry about much. Just right now, for now, I see fine.
Okay, great.
And hopefully in July when I see you, you can tell me the same thing.
Well, you're doing great. So, okay, well, thanks so much for sharing there, Paul. And hopefully you'll be able to stay on for the rest of this. All right, so what we're going to do now. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul?
Go ahead and hang up the phone.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, no problem.
All right, great. So we'll have a clean line here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, so, keratoconus is essentially, I like to think of keratoconus and explain it as hernia. Like, people can get a hernia, like men may get a hernia in the groin where the tissue's weak and it bulges out. And keratoconus is like having a hernia, but it's actually on the cornea. And so the cornea is made of these sheets of collagen fibers, and they're stacked on top of each other, a little bit just like if you think about sheets of plywood, stacked one on top of the other. But here they're supposed to be keeping a shape in the cornea, but when there's a weakness or a hernia that occurs that bulges out, it starts to cause those distortions. And that's really kind of the element for keratoconus. Now, in terms of the cause, is what we know is that free radicals in the cornea build up. And so when they're building up, they start to, essentially like building up here, they start to cause this weakening. And that weakening is what's leading to the bulge in the cornea with keratoconus. And, of course, if you have a bulge in the groin, usually not a big deal, but if you're trying to look through this as a lens on your eye, it can cause a lot of problems. And so this is just to give you an example of what a normal cornea looks like. This is a mapping. It's called topography. It's a map of the shape of the cornea. And the way that we look at this is we want to see that there's a symmetry from one half of the cornea, for example, to the other half of the cornea. And so this is a symmetrical cornea, and light rays going through it focus clearly and allow things to be seen. Now, on the other hand, a cornea with keratoconus is going to be very asymmetric. And when we look at this line here, we see that there's no mirror image symmetry anymore, particularly down below, which is the red and the yellow corresponding up here to being very steep in terms of the scale. And the blue up above is actually very flat. And so the black circle is the pupil. And so if you think about keratoconus is like you're looking through a steep lens below, but then there's a flat lens stacked right on top of it, and your pupil is trying to look through both, and that doesn't give good quality vision, and that's the source of the vision problems with keratoconus. And another variant of keratoconus is called pellucid marginal degeneration. And here, the steepening occurs a little further out in the periphery. It's still the same underlying cause. Pellucid is just a subtype of keratoconus, but it's still in the keratoconus family. And as I mentioned before, the issue here is that free radicals are building up in the cornea, and they're slowly starting to basically bombard the collagen fibers, breaking it down, slowly making them thin, and that is what causes the weakening. And really the root cause is that the levels of antioxidants in the cornea are abnormally below proper levels. And so they don't have that protection mechanism to prevent the damage that occurs to the collagen. So that's the source, is that the free radicals are building up and they're actually breaking through the collagen fibers slowly. Now there are some ways to decrease the free radicals, and these are some very practical things. Being outside in the sun without sunglasses, the sunlight itself actually stimulates more free radicals in the cornea. And so therefore it's a good idea to wear sunglasses when outside, and wearing a hat too, because that blocks sun coming from on top of the sunglasses. So the dual combination gives you the best protection. And eye rubbing is also not a great thing because the eye rubbing stimulates free radicals in the cornea too. So I know sometimes it can be very tough not to rub the eyes, but there are some types of drops like Patanol, and there's an over-the-counter drop called Nafcon A Those are very good for decreasing allergies that some people have in the eyes. And then also using antioxidants, that can give your eyes some additional benefit as well, particularly if they have N-acetylcysteine and alpha-lipoic acid, and these are good overall antioxidants. Now, how does keratoconus get treated? Well, as you've heard, there's essentially 4 main procedures that can make very dramatic improvements in the keratoconus. C3R is the one where this stands for corneal collagen cross-linking using riboflavin, and I'll go into more detail about that. Intacs is the other one, and that's where we insert these little tiny segments that help reshape the cornea. And then also CK, standing for conductive keratoplasty, is a heat treatment with a probe. And these 3 procedures really make up the most modern ways of reshaping the cornea, improving vision, avoiding a transplant, and stabilizing keratoconus. I consider these as essentially a part 1 procedure process for patients. Now, part 2 is when patients say, okay, this has been great, I'm definitely seeing better now with my lenses, or sometimes they don't need lenses. But if they do, the Visian ICL is essentially an implantable contact lens implant. And that can do a tremendous job of correcting most of the prescription and sometimes all the prescription that's left over, so patients can see really well even without any lenses. So to talk a little bit more about C3R, it's really designed to preserve eyesight. So it's more of a preserving vision procedure. I almost kind of think of if somebody's rolling down a hillside, and then the C3R procedure can stop them from falling. So it just kind of stops the fall, keeps them where they're at. Procedures like Intacs and CK actually can pull them back up the mountain. So this is more of a preserving. And it's oftentimes now considered a first-line defense against patients, especially if they're newly diagnosed. We recently treated a patient who was 11 years old who was just diagnosed. And it's very powerful to be able to stop what you know is looming in the future in terms of vision deterioration, to stop that right in its tracks. There's also other conditions that benefit, such as other forms of keratoconus, like mild keratoconus called forme fruste or pellucid, and keratoconus that can occur after LASIK can also be stabilized too. And also we can combine C3R with other procedures to get an augmentative effect, such as with Intacs and with CK. And the mechanism during the 30-minute procedure is that a patient will be sitting down. We have a very cushy, lazy boy type chair, and we have the light that's in front of the eyes. And there's no pain in the process, and the light is shined, and riboflavin drops are applied every 3 minutes, and that leads to the increase in the collagen cross-linking, which is strengthening the cornea, making the cornea stiffer, and that's what gives us the stability. And if you think about a situation here where there's, these are the collagen fibers, one on top of the other, like I explained a little bit, thinking of sheets of plywood, one on top of the other. And these are the cross-links between them that kind of hold them in place. Well, with keratoconus, you have fewer of those cross-links. And what C3R does is it essentially increases those cross-links, so it's basically reinforcing, calling in the troops, if you will. And I like to think about the analogy, if a building is tipping because the beams, the structural steel beams are weak, C3R is kind of the equivalent, the way I think of it, is being able to spray liquid steel over those steel beams to reinforce it and stop the building from tipping. And the safety profile is extremely high. There's been no reports of causing cataracts or corneal damage, such as endothelial cell loss, no problems with the retina. And the reason why that the procedure has such a high safety profile is that the amount of ultraviolet light that penetrates the eye is very, very dilute compared to being outside in the sun. And we actually did a study where we actually had a donor eye, and we went outside and we checked the amount of UV that would reach the retina. and we compared it to the amount of UV reaching the retina from C3R, and C3R levels were 500 times less than the UV outside in the shade on a sunny day. So in other words, being out in the shade on a sunny day has 500 times the amount of ultraviolet light exposure than the C3R. So they're very, very dilute levels of ultraviolet light, and that's why the profile is so high. Now, there's some discussion certainly about something called epi-off C3R versus epi-on, and this is referring to epithelium. And on the surface of the cornea, there's a very thin, clear layer of skin cells called epithelium. And there's two ways of doing C3R. Originally, it was developed in Europe where the epithelial layer was removed, kind of like having a giant scratch, or the epithelial cells are kind of scratched or removed from the surface. And then the procedure would be done, and then a contact lens is put on for for about 5 days, and the skin cells slowly grow back. It's like having a scratched cornea, if you will. And that's how the original procedure was done. What is an alternative is to leave the epithelium intact, which is called epi-on C3R. And there are ways that we've devised to allow the riboflavin to penetrate into the cornea through the intact epithelium. And so from a procedure point of view, patients have a very, very easy time recovering. It's just almost a painless procedure in this way because there's no epithelium that's been disrupted. And it's a one-day recovery. Compared to when you have to remove the epithelium and waiting for that to heal back. The advantages of not removing epithelium and doing epi-on is, number one, it avoids steroids drops and avoids antibiotic drops too. It's just a one-day recovery. And also we avoid these risks that do exist with epi-off, or when you remove the epithelium. Haze has been reported to occur in the cornea because the epithelium acts as a protective barrier to the cornea against getting haze. So we don't see haze with epi-on, and there's also really no pain. And of course, when you remove the epithelium, it's like having your eye scratched, and that can be pretty uncomfortable. And also, since the epithelium has to heal, there have been some cases where it's taken a lot longer than normal for it to heal too. Of course, all these risks don't occur with epi-on because, by definition, the epithelium is on. Now, there is some debate that if you don't remove the epithelium, it's just not possible for the riboflavin to penetrate into the cornea. And, of course, riboflavin needs to be in the cornea in order to have the reaction of strengthening and cross-linking with the light exposure. And we actually took some digital photographs of the cornea. This is a cross-section of the light, so you can imagine this is the way the cornea is shaped. And the riboflavin is kind of yellow-greenish in color, and I just wanted to point out that it shows that even with intact epithelium, we are able to get penetration of the riboflavin into the cornea, and that's why we see the results to be the same in terms of if the epithelium was removed for C3R. So there's a few things that we do in terms of giving some special drops that help that riboflavin to penetrate, but definitely it does. And sometimes the picture is really worth 1,000 words and 1,000 discussions. And there it is. These pictures are also from the book that we have too, that are published. There was a doctor who did a very good side-by-side study comparing epi-on C3R versus epi-off, comparing two groups of patients that were matched. And this was Dr. Pinelli, who is in Italy, and this was published in iWorld last year. And he found that there was absolutely no difference in the clinical results in terms of the benefits of the patients. They got the same amount of benefit from the procedure, same safety level. But the big difference was here in terms of the discomfort. Obviously, without removing the epithelium, patients on a scale of 1 to 10 were very comfortable compared to people who the epithelium had to heal back because it was removed. And they were much more satisfied with the procedure compared to when the epithelium was off. So the take-home message here is that the results have been shown by a careful controlled study by other people that it is equal in terms of the effectiveness of the procedures. So there's no gain in having to remove the epithelium, except, of course, if you like to have a painful, red, uncomfortable eye, then you know people can opt for the epi off. But certainly, I don't think anyone will raise their hand in the audience when they're asked if they want to have that option. Most people, I think everyone is going to want to go with a procedure that is very easy and doesn't have any downsides. And these are some of the background research on C3R and cross-linking technology, just to give you some idea on what the background and the depth of the research has been in this area. So the basic use of C3R, just to summarize, is to help prevent keratoconus from progressing. It can be combined with Intacs and can help people stay in either their soft lenses or glasses if they're there, or if they're in gas perm, to still remain comfortable in gas perm lenses. Now, if you look at the course of progression, this, I just want to give you an example of sometimes how fast keratoconus can progress. And this was a 19-year-old woman who we saw back in 2003. At that time, she was wearing soft contact lenses with overall pretty good vision, and we had explained that she can take a proactive approach with C3R to stop it from getting worse, and she ended up wanting to take what she called the wait-and-see approach. She came back a year and a half later because her vision had deteriorated. She had a very big increase in astigmatism, and I just want to walk you through the topography maps here. This was when we saw her back in 2003. You can see this is the right eye. There's a little cone. That yellow-red is showing a little bit of a cone steepening. And then a year and a half later, a very dramatic increase in the cone. And her astigmatism went from 0.75 diopters to over 4 diopters. So pretty big change. Unfortunately, the left eye had got even worse. And this is, again, where she was in 2003 and then in 2005. And again, here's the difference map showing how much of the keratoconus had progressed with that new steepening. And her astigmatism had gone from about 2 diopters up to almost 9 diopters. So at that point, we were able to do C3R plus Intacs and help do a fair amount of reversal. But the results still weren't as good as if she would have at least just prevented it in the 2003 time period. Here's another case of a patient who had keratoconus after LASIK, and it was able to stop the keratoconus from progressing and maintain good vision and even improve the vision a little bit just by the C3R. And this just shows the pre-C3R treatment topography in the post. And we look at what the pattern of red is, and we see the red is a lot less here. And on the difference map, I always like to explain the difference map is like essentially an injection mold that somebody might be looking for. And it tells us what the difference subtraction between pre and post. And so the blue here is showing the flattening that we were able to achieve over the cone just by the C3R itself. So sometimes we can get this effect just by itself. And this just summarizes some of the philosophies behind C3R, which is really to take a catch and stabilize and preserve the vision approach. And it can definitely keep people, if they're currently wearing soft contacts, in the soft contacts, and prevent them getting to the point where they have to go to things like gas perm and other types of contacts that are a little more difficult to use. The fitting process can also be maintained as pretty straightforward without allowing to get worse, requiring more fitting times and more visits when you go more into specialty contacts. And there's more information on the website, keratoconusinserts.com. Now, to talk a little bit about Intacs, which is really designed to help reverse the keratoconus and give additional improvements in the eyesight because of the way that these Intacs work on the cornea. And if you think about it, they look like little braces that are placed to help structurally reinforce the corneal shape. And, typically in the past, 2 were placed. I'll get into why we're placing 1 most of the time these days. But this was the traditional way that they would look in the cornea. And they go mid-thickness below the surface, so patients can't feel them. It's a little like the dental filling concept. They're there, but you don't even know it's there. And they do help reduce the cone and improve the vision. And that translates into reducing a good part of, if not all, of the double vision, the shadowing, and the halos that the keratoconus can cause, because the way the Intex can help push back that cone. And it can enhance the vision without lenses or with lenses, and can oftentimes get patients to move from one type of contact lens technology to an easier type of contact lens technology. For example, if somebody's wearing RGP or those hard lenses, they might be able to go into soft contacts afterwards, or go into the synergized contact lens system. So it's all about improving the types of lenses that patients can wear. This just shows an example back in the old days, so to speak, in 2000 when we were doing Intex, when we were using two segments shown in pink here. And they would cause an overall global flattening of the cornea. And here before we see, obviously, the red is the steepening, and it's a lot less here. But the blue, which was flat, was also made flatter by these two segments. So we got flattening in the upper and lower part of the cornea. And we published our results in 2003 after we had done the original studies with Intex for keratoconus in the United States. And then a few years later, I made a discovery that there was, for some reason, I could only place one segment in a cornea. I don't remember the exact reason why, but I can only put the lower segment in. And I noticed something really unique on the topographies, is that we did achieve the flattening on the cone area, but above, where the cornea was actually flat, it did something very unique and surprising. It actually got steeper. And that's the best type of result we can get, is because we want to make the overall corneal shape better. And this is to give you an example of how that looked. So here is the cone before the single Intex segment, and here's the cone afterwards. And it looks kind of similar. Certainly you can kind of say, well, I don't see much of a difference. But again, this is why I always like to look at these difference maps, because it does a subtraction of the two topographies. And we see here that the blue is representing the flattening that occurred over the cone, which is, of course, what we would expect. But this was the unique effect. The red and the yellow up above is where the cornea, which was flat, actually got steeper. So again, when you look back and you think back, we talked about the profile of keratoconus. It's steep below and flat above. Here we flattened the steep, and here we steepened the flat. So this is the right direction, and we actually then did a comparative study, and I'll show you the results of that in a moment. But we see this effect very, very consistently, and I like to describe this as essentially the beanbag effect, because just like with a beanbag, if you sit down here, it goes down and flattens, but up above it pops up. So this is kind of what we're seeing here, is we see the flattening in this zone and then the steepening up here. And that's what makes the overall corneal shape more towards what our ideal improvement is. And we see this, again, very, very consistently, this effect with a single segment, and we don't get that with a double segment. And it's very predictable. And we actually did a comparative study where we compared the single segment results to the double segment results in a matched group of patients that had keratoconus and keratoconus after LASIK. And we found that we got more improvement in the single segment group than the double segment group for these types of peripheral keratoconus cases. Now, of course, there's not always going to be, perfection all the time with any kind of procedure. There are some doctors who are placing, because the Intex come in different sizes and different thicknesses, they are placing a thicker segment in the flat zone, which is blue, and then the thinner segment in the steep part, which is red. And the little insight here is that the thicker the Intex, the more flattening they cause. So a thick Intex is going to cause a lot more flattening than a thin one. And so here, this is just the exact opposite that you'd actually want to do. You'd want to put the thickest segment you can by the cone to push it down. And if you are going to choose to place a segment here, you at least want to pick the thinnest one, not the thicker. And so this technique, and we've seen a number of these patients who've had bad results after Intacs, and this is the reason why, is because this can actually make the keratoconus asymmetry even worse. And so, certainly one of the things always to ask, that I always ask, if somebody didn't have a good result and they say it didn't work for them, my question is, were the Intacs placed correctly? And a lot of times this is the explanation. And we actually published this finding of placing the wrong Intac sizes in keratoconus. We published this last year in the Journal of Refractive Surgery to alert surgeons of the technique does make or break the success of the procedure. Now the results and tie into the expectations of what patients can have, and I like to kind of give a general guide that if somebody did 20/20 to 20/50 after Intacs, the expectations typically soft contact lenses, synergized contacts or glasses, or perhaps even no lenses at all. And with the more advanced stage of keratoconus, the expectations become a little bit more conservative in terms of what can be expected. So that's part of our counseling, is I'll personally give everybody, the skinny, so to speak, on what to expect for their stage of keratoconus, because it does, there is a range of severity, and that does tie into what to expect afterwards. Now, another unique effect of Intacs is when we combine it with C3R, and we get a synergistic effect here, because we get some additional flattening when we have both Intacs and C3R used together. And so here's an example of a case. The keratoconus here is actually off to the side, where it's relatively steep here and relatively flat here, and we placed a single segment over here. And in this case, we were able to, for example, just reduce the astigmatism from 3 diopters down to 1.5 and improve the best corrected vision from 20/30 to 20/20. And this mapping up here looks almost kind of fairly normal at this stage. So again, the Intacs have to be placed in the proper position. Sometimes their surgeons are placing them only down below, and you can see in this case that would not have given us the results that we were able to achieve. So it's a real customized procedure. And again, this is why we are out there. I'm speaking at meetings, trying to educate doctors, publishing articles, and just published a book on this. Here's an example of how we had a combined Intac C3R going from this type of prescription and astigmatism of 4.5 down to a vision without any contacts or lenses of 20/20. So we can certainly see that from time to time. And here's another type of result of needing lenses to go to 20/25, and here no lenses afterwards to 20/25. And just another example, in this case we used a double segment to help achieve this type of flattening, and a very significant improvement in the best corrected vision from being worse than 2100 down to 20/40. And just again, another example here of the type of flattening we can see on the difference map with the combined treatment approach. And we actually did a comparative study where we looked at doing Intacs by itself, comparing to Intacs and C3R, and we found that we got that augmented effect. So it definitely seems to make a significant improvement to have both procedures working against the keratoconus. CK, which has been mentioned before for conductive keratoplasty, helps reduce astigmatism. And here we use a probe that is essentially non-invasively applying gentle heat spots to the cornea in certain areas to target the astigmatism. And then the C3R following this locks in the benefit of having the astigmatism reduction. I want to give you an example here of a very high astigmatism case, over 13 diopters. And here with the Intacs and the CK, and then followed by the C3R, we're able to reduce the astigmatism down to 3 diopters. And again, just to show you on the difference map, this is showing us the induced astigmatism that we cause with the CK that was 90 degrees away from this very high pre-existing astigmatism. And so this is the bow tie pattern. That's the astigmatism right here, which was really high. and this is where we are post-op. So we can really make very targeted, guided approaches with CK to help reduce the astigmatism, even for very high degrees like that. Now, in patients that have some leftover nearsightedness, we can treat that too with a procedure called the Visian ICL. And it is designed not to correct the cornea, but it's really to correct the prescription in the vision. And this can be considered almost like a part 2 that could occur perhaps 3 months after the part 1 procedures that we've just talked about. And the way the ICL works is it's actually placed in about a 9-minute procedure. We make a tiny little opening here. Some of you may have seen a couple months ago me do this live on the NBC Today show. But if you wanted to watch that segment, it's at iclinformation.com. But essentially what we do is make a tiny little opening, and we place this ICL lens behind the pupil and behind the iris, and it's just tucked in this little area on both sides, and it's just in between the biological lens and the iris, so you can't feel it. Again, it's like a dental filling, like the way the Intacts are. And what we've observed is that, especially for very high prescriptions of nearsightedness, when you take that prescription that's usually in a contact lens sitting in front of the cornea with keratoconus, and then you put it behind the cornea like this, optically it's much superior because it's placed behind the cornea, and patients not only correct their vision, but they get this improvement oftentimes in what they could see even with their contact lens here. So that has a lot of potential for significant further improvements just by using optics to our advantage, even though we're not really changing the shape of the cornea with the ICL. The cost can range depending on different parts of the country, but this just gives you a range, for example, for the C3R treatment per eye, and for the Intacts, and for the CK, and for the ICL, and for contact lens fitting. So a lot of times patients will consider financing, which is popular, which can range anywhere in the ballpark of a few $100s a month. Insurance can cover a portion of the Intacts and a portion of contact lenses. Whether it's they're going to cover C3R, CK, and the ICL, may be less likely, but still, there may be some potential there too. That's why financing tends to be pretty popular. And there's a lot more details that are in the book, Modern Management of Keratoconus. That's available as well, that we recently published. So we do have some time for questions, and probably the best way to send me questions is at the bottom. It says Q question and answer, and that's like doing a little instant message. So you can, if you'd like, start perhaps typing in some questions there. And I don't know if we'll have time to get through all of them. So if we don't get your question, I do want to apologize, but you can certainly email us directly at info@boxerwalkler.com. And also we have a blog that provides information too, which is www.freeeyesurgerytips.com. So I'm going to try to do as many of these questions as I can in our time frame without going too far over. And one question is, can you help someone with a 12-year-old cornea transplant and that's dying and get a lot of edema? And these procedures that we're talking about are for patients in corneas that don't have transplants. And so I have done Intacts on patients with transplants, but they have to kind of meet a very strict criteria for that. But if the cornea itself is not healthy, the transplanted cornea is not healthy, not doing well, it's really going to require some specialized techniques, and I would just recommend, I'm sure you're probably under the care of a corneal surgeon, and to address those questions there. A question, I'm now farsighted and vision getting worse. So being farsighted means that the prescription is being hyperopic, and we use CK, the conductive keratoplasty procedure, for treating farsightedness or overcorrected cases, because that was the original FDA approval of CK. It was for farsightedness. So we can actually do that in keratoconus, and it can work very well. Another question here is, I have Intex and I use a macro lens on my right eye. Do I have any chance to improve my vision without the macro lens? Well, if you already had Intex, then you might consider the Vizient ICL procedure to correct the rest of the nearsightedness. So that can be an option. Can you explain the difference again between the epi-on and epi-off? And the epithelium is left intact with the epi-on procedure, and with epi-off, the epithelium is removed. So, with epi-on, it's essentially non-invasive compared to epi-off. But they both do work equally the same, but one's a lot harder as a patient to kind of go through in the initial recovery for that first week. Let's see, what kind of long-term effect is there from the UV light on the health of the cornea? And this is from a patient who has a son who's now 17 years old and was diagnosed originally at the age of 12. And the original studies on the C3R cross-linking actually go back about 9 years now in Europe when they were first done. And those patients all are doing well. And again, I think the safety is so high because of the fact that the UV light is such a diluted amount compared to even just if you were outside in the sun for half a day. You're getting a significantly dilute amount of that same sunlight. So that's why I think it's been shown to be so safe. Another question is, will you perform C3R without Intex? And certainly we have. We've done C3R without Intex, especially if it's an early case of keratoconus. Then that is the ideal type of time to catch it early, so to speak, before it gets to the point of needing some of the other procedures. Okay, another question is, if I had surgery in my left eye in August 2007, what is the normal healing time for the surgery? Well, from Intex and CK and C3R, they all are going, especially the Intex and the CK, everything is stable generally at about 3 months after the procedure. So that's when you can expect things to be stabilized. So certainly from August in 2007, things should be stable at that point. I have ectasia, wearing gas perm lenses, corrected visions probably around 2025, lots of ghosting and starbursting because of the steepness. If I do C3R with or without contacts, how quick can I be refitted? Well, if you're wearing gas perm lenses and you have C3R, for example, you can go back to wearing those lenses the very next day. So it's just a one-day recovery. If you want to move into a different type of contact lens technology, then it will take a little bit of time in the fitting process in between the procedure and getting refit, and that may be, depending on the contact lens fitter, 1 to 2 weeks on average. Next question is, hi, I'm from Mexico City and would like to know what are the different treatments for keratoconus. I would just probably advise you to take a look at this webinar. It will be available as a recorded webinar on our website probably sometime in July, so that will be a good summary for you in case you did miss any of these pieces of the keratoconus treatment paradigm. Next question is, let's see what we have here. Can you elaborate if there's a commitment to retreatment? And basically, if we are going to do any kind of retreatments, which is very, very rare, but the question is, will there be a charge? And if we do a retreatment, which is only for C3R been, I'd say maybe 1% of the time we've had to do a second C3R treatment to get the full benefit. And these were patients who had very aggressive types of keratoconus. And there's no additional charge in the first year if we had to do that second C3R treatment, as an example. Next question, is the Vizient ICL implanted with Intacs? Well, we actually do it in 2 stages. Because the prescription will change after the Intacs, we want to have that done first and kind of, so to speak, be well, out of the system, that change because of the Intacs and the improvement, before making the measurements for the Vizient ICL. So we'll stage it. We'll usually want to wait about 3 months to do that. And next question is, if I have a high degree of astigmatism, will the ICL improve that? And so generally with high astigmatism, we'll want to try to improve that as much as we can, for example, with the CK procedure. So that does allow us to really give us maximal reshaping of the cornea before we go ahead with the ICL procedure as well. And next question, if I had 2 segments inserted, would it be worth a try to remove one and reposition the other to have a 1-segment procedure? And that's a really great question. We have done quite a number of these types of situations where previously there were 2 segments that were placed, and we can actually selectively remove 1 segment, and that actually ends up giving you the same result as if you would have had 1 segment to begin with. So the good news is that those can be adjusted, and sometimes the adjustments can be made even in the single segment that's remaining if it wasn't in the ideal position. Can you talk a little bit about the Vizient ICL and the details of that? Well, the ICL, it's an outpatient procedure, and it's about, like I said, about 9 minutes. And what it does is it just is basically like having a vision correction procedure, because it's becoming very popular even just for patients without keratoconus that just have nearsightedness as an alternative to LASIK, because of the fact that it doesn't involve, it's really non-invasive to the cornea. So a lot more people are opting for that and feeling more comfortable with that as well. And so the recovery is very, very, very quick and very easy for patients. About a 1-day recovery from the ICL procedure. Another comment here. I'm Sean Fay. I'm a patient you operated on in March, and I'm still on the. So you're still on the line. I'd be happy to share my experience as well. Well, Sean, thanks for being able to instant message that and sharing, being willing to share your experience. Maybe what we can do is, if you wanted to, because of the way the phone lines are, I can't open up the phone lines just individually out there. But if you wanted to email me, then I can email everybody your experience if you'd like to share that. So thanks for offering that. Another question is, what's the optimal age range for the patient for the procedures, i.e., can you be too old? And actually what we found is that as long as the cornea is the proper thickness that it needs to be for C3R, there doesn't seem really to be any age range that is precluded from benefiting from C3R. Like I mentioned, our youngest patient was 11 years old, and I think our oldest patient who was having progressive keratoconus was in his 60s. So keratoconus, despite the standard teaching, can be progressive at any age, and I've even seen newly diagnosed cases in people in their 40s and 50s. So another question is, let's see, I had C3R in April of 2007. I didn't do Intacs at the time. Since you're now doing 1-ring Intacs, would you suggest going forward with Intacs or ICL? And that's a question that would probably be best if you emailed me specifically to take a look at your chart, and then I can advise you specifically if at this point it would make more sense to do the Intacs or the ICL. So again, there's a lot of customization, for each patient in this process, as you're probably all getting a sense of. But that's kind of what it's about, is customizing it, for each person, because no two people, no two corneas are really the same. has C3R ever failed to stabilize a keratoconus cornea? And in 1% of the time, like I mentioned earlier, some patients had to have a second C3R procedure done to give full stabilization. So with that, to my knowledge, there hasn't been anyone that hasn't been stabilized. Even in that small 1% group of people after the second treatment, they have been able to be stabilized. And another question about the Visian ICL is how long do you have for Visian ICL recovery? Typically, it's a one-day recovery. So it's just a day of resting, and but even immediately when people are done, they can sit up and they can see right when they sit up from the table. Probably the best way to see what it's like for a Visian ICL patient is the recording of that Today Show segment that's on the website, www.iclinformation.com. It kind of gives you a very good overview on how they covered this live ICL procedure that I did on national TV a few months ago. That I think that kind of would be really revealing on what that whole process is like. And let's see, another question is, I had PRK, will C3R cause dry eyes? And because at least the epi-on C3R is non-invasive, we haven't seen people get dry eyes or any side effects really from it. Now, if the epithelium's removed, then there's definitely going to be some severe, discomfort and dry eye symptoms while that's healing, because as you've had PRK, if you think about epi-off C3R, it's like PRK because your epithelium is removed and you go through that whole period. That's why there's also the risk of haze with the epi-off C3R too, and whereas there's not with epi-on. So I would say the epi-on C3R doesn't cause dry eyes. The epi-off can. Is keratoconus hereditary? And it's only passed on from parents to children in about 5% of the cases of keratoconus. So that's actually really good news, that if you have keratoconus and you're wondering about your children, there's only a 5% chance that they're actually going to have it. I'd still probably recommend when they're old enough to sit in front of a topography machine, maybe around age 9 or 10, that they maybe have a baseline topography done, just so they have a established baseline mapping. And it's always something to measure against as they get older in the future, because if they did start to develop some very early inferior steepening on the topography, if you and the doctor could look back at maybe that first map that they had that was normal, then you'd be able to really tell that there's something new developing. And then you have a choice to either, maybe have a C3R procedure done or just continue monitoring. But it is a good baseline exam, I think, to have for patients with children for that purpose. Next question is, let's see, are follow-ups covered as part of the cost? What if I'm from a different state? Basically, the way that the details of that work is that, the procedure itself is, the fees are inclusive, and we make an adjustment in our fee for out-of-town patients because we know that they're going to be following up with a colleague of mine or somebody who we arrange for the follow-up care to be with. So we do make that adjustment, but probably more details of that, are best handled by my staff. So feel free if you wanted to call to get more details on how the logistics of that work. And the phone number is 310-860-1900. I have post-LASIK ectasia progressing. I wear Synergize with a correction of 20/20. I'm told I'm not a candidate for Intex. Why? Is it because of very dry eyes? Well, again, without seeing exam results, it's hard for me really to answer that question. I would say that if you are wearing your Synergize lenses and you're seeing 20/20, number one, that's great. But number two, which is not great, is that things are progressing. So I think at least you might think about having C3R done just to at least, again, stop that process. Again, I think of the progression like rolling down the hillside, and then C3R just kind of stops the roll and just holds things steady so you don't roll further down. And that is easy just to resume the Synergize the day after the C3R from that point of view. Next question, what are the new technologies for pellucid marginal degeneration or keratoconus that are still being developed? Well, really the new technologies are what we're really talking about here, particularly with the C3R and the application of CK and the application of Visian ICL. I know it probably seems by listening to this talk that this is all pretty commonplace now and is being done mainstream by everybody, but the reality is that very few doctors are really doing these types of techniques, especially at this level. So this is still what you've been listening to, the cutting edge future technology that's slowly getting out there to the field. And probably in about 5 or 10 years, these will be all very commonly performed types of procedures by everyone. But at this point, this is still kind of the future that is being done just by a select few people, by a select few doctors. If I must wear hard lenses to see after all 3 procedures, am I a candidate for ICL? And that's certainly an option depending on the prescription. That ICL can then kind of take it to the next level, so to speak. There's a prescription in these, like for example with John, who gave his experience earlier here in the call, is that he still had a prescription of being nearsighted, and then he wanted to really kind of go all the way, so to speak, and take his vision to the next level and not need to wear lenses. And that's why he elected to do the ICO, which corrected his prescription. So it depends a little bit on your goals, and everyone's goals are not necessarily the same. And I guess the message there is that there are ways of combining these procedures to really customize meeting everybody's goal. And I think that's about all the time we're going to have for questions. So I'd just like to thank everyone for your patience and interest level in really informing yourself about what's really the most modern techniques and technologies for helping your keratoconus. And I've always been a big believer in educating people and providing education. And even if it's something that's not what some other people in the field want getting out there to patients, I've always been an advocate for the patient. And that's why we spend so much time and resources, educating and getting the word out, writing and publishing to help people. Because that's really what it's all about. And so, again, I'd like to thank everybody. Thank Jacob and John and Paul and Jamila for sharing your experiences. That was very, very thoughtful. Take the time to do that. And for all of you for your attention, too. And, if you do have questions, we are available. You can email us or you can call us. And thanks very much. And I hope if, at least at a minimum, this has shared light that there is more than just the traditional knee-jerk reaction that still is told to so many patients today that you have keratoconus and the only thing for you is a hard contacts or a transplant. So definitely we know that that's not the case. Well, thank you all again, and thanks for your attention, and have a great rest of the night. Bye now.